Please subscribe to my channel. This is my sincere request to you. I did not spy on my family. They volunteered the evidence into my voicemail. My sister accidentally called while they treated my existence like a punchline. But the insults were not the chilling part. It was what they said next. As long as she keeps paying the bills, let her think she is respected. Tonight, I am dismantling the castle they think I am building for them brick by brick. My name is Harper Parker. I am 33 years old, and my job at Betrayal Asset Group is to predict when a stable-looking investment is about to collapse. I spend my days staring at spreadsheets, calculating risk ratios, and telling wealthy clients that the foundation of their portfolio is not as solid as they think it is. I am very good at my job. I can spot a fracture in a corporate merger from a mile away. I can smell a bad debt hidden in a quarterly report before the CFO even opens his mouth. But on that Tuesday afternoon, sitting in a conference room on the 42nd floor with a view of the Chicago skyline, I missed the most obvious red flag of my life because it was wearing the face of my own family. The meeting was dragging on. We were discussing a mid-cap merger that had stalled due to regulatory issues, and the air in the room was stale, recycled, and smelling faintly of burnt coffee. My phone was sitting face down on the mahogany table right next to my notepad. I usually kept it on silent, but for some reason I had left it on vibrate. When it buzzed, the sound was aggressive against the wood, a sharp, angry rattle that made the senior partner pause mid-sentence. I apologized with a quick nod and flipped the phone over. Missed call. Thel Parker. I frowned. My sister never called me during the workday. Thel lived in a time zone that operated entirely on brunch reservations and late-night social cues. If she was calling me at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, it usually meant an emergency, or she needed money, or more likely, she needed money for an emergency that she had invented. Then the voicemail notification popped up. A voicemail. That was even stranger. Thel belonged to a generation that treated voicemail like a relic from the Stone Age. If she could not say it in a text, she usually did not say it at all. I felt a prick of worry in my chest. I excused myself from the table, muttering something about a potential client issue, and stepped out into the hallway. The corridor was quiet, lined with abstract art that cost more than my first car. I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end, looking out at the gray city, and tapped the play button. I expected to hear panic. I expected to hear tears. Instead, I heard the distinct clatter of silverware on porcelain. The audio was clear, disturbingly so. It sounded like the phone was sitting right in the middle of a table, perhaps face up, capturing everything with high fidelity. There was a hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and a burst of laughter that I recognized instantly. It was my mother, Diane. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass of the window, confused. They were at lunch. Why was Belle calling me from lunch? Then I heard a rustling sound, like a purse being moved, and realized she must have accidentally triggered the call while setting her phone down. I was about to hang up, relieved that nobody was in the hospital, but then I heard my name. Well, Harper would not know good taste if it bit her on the nose, my mother said. Her voice was sharp, the way it always was after her second glass of wine. She is a sweet girl, really, but she has absolutely nothing to show for herself. I froze. The phone was pressed so hard against my ear that it hurt. She does have a good job. Diane, my father, Gary said. His voice was softer, muted, the sound of a man who had spent 30 years learning that the path of least resistance was to just agree and look at his shoes. Oh, please, Belle, cut in. Her voice was closer to the microphone, loud and confident. She works in a cubicle. Dad, she stares at numbers all day. She is basically a calculator with a bad haircut. It is just so dry. Can you imagine living like that? She is 33, and what does she do? She saves. She hoards. She is like a squirrel. Laughter rippled around the table. It was not just them. I heard other voices, likely an aunt or a cousin. They were an audience, and I was the entertainment. I stood there in the hallway of Betrayal Asset Group, wearing a suit that cost $1,200, holding a portfolio worth millions in my other hand, and I felt like a child who had been picked last for kickball. They were discussing me not with concern, but with disdain. They were dissecting my life, my choices, my very personality, and finding it lacking. But look at you, darling. My mother cooed. I could practically see her reaching across the table to squeeze Belle's hand. This loft you found. It is magnificent. Truly, the exposed brick, the skylights. Now, this is how a Parker is supposed to live. It shows ambition. It shows class. It is perfect. Belle agreed, and I could hear the smugness dripping from her words like syrup. And the location in the riverfront district. It screams success. I had to fight off 3 other offers. But you know me, I get what I want. I felt a flash of irritation. The riverfront district was expensive. Incredibly expensive. I knew for a fact that Belle had been between jobs, as she liked to call her periods of unemployment, for 6 months. How was she affording a loft in the riverfront? I should have hung up then. I should have ended the call and saved myself the heartache. But I am a risk analyst. When I see data, I need to see the whole data set. I need to know the extent of the rot. So I kept listening. But Gary asked, his voice a little anxious, "Can you handle the overhead? The rent, there must be 3,000 a month." 3,500, Belle corrected. "And do not worry about it, Dad. I have it covered. Harper is handling the logistics." My blood ran cold. "Harper?" Diane asked, sounding surprised, but not displeased. "Yeh," Belle said, lowering her voice slightly, though the clarity of the recording did not waver. "I told her I needed a little help getting settled. You know how she is. She loves to feel useful. She needs to feel like she is the responsible one. It makes her feel superior. So I let her pay. She let me pay." The phrasing hit me like a physical slap. I remembered the conversation we had had a few months ago. She had cried. She had told me she was about to be homeless. She had said she just needed a bridge to get her back on her feet. I had transferred the money within 10 minutes. "It is not just the rent," Belle continued. And now she was laughing again. "She put the electric bill on her auto pay and the car insurance. And I think she's even paying off the balance on the family joint card. Wait, Diane said she is paying the card. The one we used for the trip to Carpo. There. Belle said she does not even check the statements. She just pays it. Honestly, it is pathetic. She is so desperate for us to like her that she just throws money at the problem." There was a pause, a silence that stretched for 2 seconds, heavy and suffocating. "Well," Diane said, and her tone was matter of fact, completely devoid of guilt. "As long as she keeps paying the bills, let her think she is respected. She pays. So, she has a place in this family. That is the arrangement." My hand was gripping the phone so tight. My knuckles were white. The hallway seemed to tilt. I felt nauseous. It was not just that they were using me. I had suspected that for years. It was the calculated cruelty of it. They knew. They knew exactly what they were doing. They had quantified my value to the family down to a monthly transaction. I was not a daughter or a sister. I was a revenue stream. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked professional. I looked composed. But inside I was hollowing out the foundation. I thought I stood on the idea that my family was messy, but loving had just collapsed. I was standing on air. But wait. The recording was not over. Gary cleared his throat. "So about the signing next week, are we sure we can use her information for their, you know, SH Diane?" "Ist. Not so loud. Yes, it is fine. Belle has her social security number and the tax returns from when she did our filing last year." The broker said, "As long as the credit score is over 750, it is a done deal, and Harper has perfect credit. She barely uses it. We are doing her a favor." "Really?" Belle added. "We are building assets for the family name. One day, when she is old and alone with her cats, she will thank us for building an empire that she can be a part of." They were taking out a loan in my name, without my consent. I lowered the phone. The recording ended, leaving me in the silence of the 42nd floor. The air conditioning hummed. A phone rang in a distant office. I did not storm back into the meeting. I did not scream. I did not cry. My training took over in my line of work. When you discover a massive liability, you do not panic. You assess. You verify. You mitigate. My hands were steady, which terrified me more than shaking would have. It meant I had already emotionally detached. I was no longer their daughter. I was the auditor. I unlocked my phone and opened my banking application. I needed to see the damage. I needed to see the lines of code that represented my exploitation. I scrolled through the transactions on my primary checking account. There was the transfer for my mortgage, the utility bill for my apartment in Milwaukee, the grocery store charge from Sunday, and then I saw it. It was a new entry authorized just last week, an automatic payment scheduled to recur on the first of every month. I had not set this up. I had never seen this merchant name before. It was labeled simply Riverfront Luxury Management. Lease. The amount was $4,200. They were not just letting me help. They had set up a direct pipeline from my bank account to Belle's lifestyle, and they had done it with the confidence of people who believed I was too stupid or too desperate for their love to ever look closely at the numbers. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. $4,200. That was more than my mortgage. That was hours of my life, days of my labor, stolen and laughed about over appetizers. I looked up from the phone and stared out at the city. The sun was shining, but everything looked gray. I took a deep breath, inhaling the recycled air. I tapped the screen and took a screenshot of the transaction. Then I moved the voicemail file from my inbox to a secure folder on my cloud drive. I named the folder The Truth. I turned around and walked back toward the conference room. I had a meeting to finish. I had a job to do, and after that I had a castle to dismantle. They thought I was the one building it for them stone by heavy stone. But they forgot one thing about people who build structures. We know exactly where the load-bearing walls are, and we know exactly which brick to pull to bring the whole thing crashing down. To understand how I ended up paying for a life I was not invited to live, you have to understand the architecture of the Parker family. Every family has a mythology, a story they tell themselves over dinner tables and holiday gatherings to make sense of who they are. In our house, the mythology was simple. Belle was the star, the protagonist, the one destined for magazine covers and heavy applause. I was the stage hand. I was the one who made sure the lights worked and the floor was swept so Belle did not trip in her heels. This dynamic was not subtle. It was the air we breathed. From the time we were children, Belle consumed the oxygen in every room. She was loud, colorful, and prone to dramatic mood swings that my mother Diane repackaged as artistic temperament. If Belle broke a vase, it was because her spirit was too big for the room. If I broke a vase, I was clumsy. If I got straight A's, I was expected to. If Belle managed a C-, we went out for ice cream to celebrate her getting through a tough semester. Diane loved the shine. She was a woman who defined herself by what she could show off to the neighbors. She wanted stories that glittered. She wanted to say, "My daughter is an actress," or "My daughter is launching a fashion line." She did not want to say, "My daughter assesses actuarial tables for a mid-sized asset management firm." That sentence was too dry. It had no hook. It did not make people envious at the country club. My father, Gary, was a different kind of problem. He was not malicious. He was just tired. He was a man who had decided 30 years ago that the easiest way to survive his marriage was to become part of the furniture. He learned that if he stayed quiet, the storm would eventually pass over him. He loved me, I think, in a vague, distracted way, but he loved peace more. And in the Parker household, peace meant giving Belle whatever she wanted so she would not scream, and giving Diane whatever she wanted so she would not sigh that heavy, martyr-like sigh that made the walls shake. So I learned to be the quiet one, the invisible one, the reliable one. I built a life that was the exact opposite of Belle's chaotic orbit. I moved to Milwaukee, an hour away, close enough to visit, but far enough to have a valid excuse when I needed to leave. My apartment was small. It was a one-bedroom on the second floor of a building that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. My furniture was beige and gray. I drove a sedan with 112,000 m on it, and I kept the oil changed on a strict schedule. To my family, my life looked like a failure of imagination. They thought I lived this way because I did not know how to dream. They did not understand that I lived this way because I loved the control. I loved knowing that if the radiator broke, I had the savings to fix it. I loved knowing that every object in my home was paid for. I found peace in the black ink of a balanced ledger. But a balanced ledger cannot protect you from people who view your solvency as a personal resource. The financial bleed did not start with a gushing wound. It started with a paper cut. It began 5 years ago on a Tuesday, much like the one where I received the voicemail. I was visiting for dinner and my father was limping. He had heard his back moving boxes of Belle's old clothes she refused to sort through, and he needed an MRI. I remember standing in the kitchen watching him WSE as he tried to open a jar of pickles. Diane was on the phone talking about a vacation she wanted to take, completely ignoring his pain. We had a high deductible. Gary had whispered to me, almost ashamed, "We have to wait until next month." I did not think. I just acted. I pulled out my card and paid the $600 for the scan. The reaction was immediate and intoxicating. For the first time in years, I was the hero. Diane hugged me. Gary teared up and called me his rock. They told the neighbors how Harper stepped up. They called me thoughtful. They called me the responsible one. It felt like love. It felt like I had finally bought my ticket onto the stage. I did not realize then that I had just signed a contract I would never be allowed to break. The second time it was a car repair for Belle. She had blown a tire hitting a curb because she was texting. She called me crying, saying she was stranded. I paid. Diane told me I was a good sister. The third time, it was a credit card bill that had gotten out of hand because Gary had tried to keep up with one of Diane's sudden urges to redecorate the living room. By the 10th time, the praise had evaporated. The transaction had become seamless, automatic. It was no longer "Harper is so kind." It became "Harper, the link is in your email," or simply "Harper, handle this." I became the infrastructure of their lives. I was the electricity, the water pressure, the safety net. And like most infrastructure, I was completely ignored until I threatened to stop working. This dynamic reached its peak when Belle announced she was moving to the Riverfront district. The Riverfront was a place for people who had made it, or people who were willing to go into massive debt to look like they had made it. When Belle showed us photos of the loft high ceilings, industrial chic lighting, a view of the water, Diane nearly fainted with joy. Finally, Diane had beamed, clasping her hands together. "A place worthy of you, Belle." I had sat at the end of the table, doing the mental math. I knew Belle's income. She was technically a brand consultant, which meant she posted photos on social media and occasionally got paid in free handbags. There was no way she could afford the rent in the riverfront. I asked the question. I tried to be gentle. I asked Brielle, "The market rate down there is aggressive. Do you have a guarantor?" The temperature in the room dropped 20. Diane turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "Why do you always do that?" "Do what I asked." Try to poke holes in her happiness. Diane snapped. "Just because you are content living in your little beige box in Milwaukee does not mean your sister has to settle. She has investors. She has opportunities." Belle had smirked, leaning back in her chair with that casual arrogance that always made my teeth ache. "Do not worry about the math. Harper, some of us operate on vision. You operate on spreadsheets. We are just different." I shut my mouth. I let it go. And a month later, when Belle called me in a panic because her vision had not cleared the check, I paid the deposit. I told myself it was a loan. I told myself she would pay me back when her big contract came through. But looking back, I realized the brilliance of their game. They separated the reality of the money from the image of the lifestyle, to the world, and even to each other. Belle owned that loft. She belonged there. The fact that the money came from my account was just a clerical detail, a boring back-end process that did not deserve to be mentioned in polite company. I tried to speak up a few times over the last year. Once, when I saw Belle post a photo of a new designer sofa while she still owed me $2,000 for the moving truck, I brought it up at Sunday dinner. I said, "Biel, that sofa is beautiful, but I really need that $2,000 back. I have my own property taxes coming up." Diane slammed her fork down. "Oh my God," Diane said, looking at Gary. "Can you believe her?" "What?" I asked, genuinely confused. "You are so transactional," Belle said, shaking her head as if she pied me. "We are family, Harper. Money flows where it is needed. Right now, I am building something. When I make it big, I would have bought you a house. But now I feel like you are just counting pennies. To make me feel small. You are jealous, Diane declared, sealing the verdict. You are jealous that she has taste and you have a savings account. You ruin the atmosphere every time you open your mouth about money. It is vulgar. Vulgar, that was the word she used. My money kept the lights on. But talking about it was vulgar. Gary just chewed his pot roast, looking at his plate, pretending he was invisible. I stopped asking. I accepted the role they assigned me. I was the silent partner. I was the wallet that did not speak. Tonight, sitting in my apartment, the silence of the room felt different. It did not feel like peace anymore. It felt like a waiting room. I picked up my phone and opened the message history with my family. I scrolled back. I scrolled past the photos of Belle's loft, past the memes Diane sent, past the generic holiday greetings. I was looking for a pattern, and there it was, glaring at me in blue and gray bubbles. August 12th, Diane. Honey, your dad's prescription isn't covered. Can you transfer 300? I replied at September 1st. Bell card got declined at dinner. So embarrassing. Fix it, I replied. All October 4th. Gary, the furnace is making a noise. Mom is worried, I replied. I will call the repair guy and put it on my card. November 10th. Diane, we need you to not come for Thanksgiving. Bella's hosting a networking thing at the loft, and it is going to be very industry specific. You would be bored, I replied. Okay. I scrolled and scrolled. For 3 years, there was not a single message that started with, "How are you?" or "I missed you." Every single initiation of contact was a demand for resources or a request for my absence. They reached out when they needed my money to solve a problem, or when they needed me to disappear so I would not stain their image with my dullness. I was not a daughter. I was a utility. I was an application running in the background of their lives, consuming battery and data, essential but unloved. I put the phone down on the coffee table. The screen went dark. The realizations settled over me, heavy and cold, like a wet wool blanket. I had spent my entire adult life trying to buy my way into their hearts. I thought if I paid enough, if I fixed enough, if I was useful enough, eventually they would look at me and see a person. But the voicemail had proved that was a lie. They saw me clearly. They saw a fool. I looked around my beige apartment. The walls were bare. The furniture was practical. It was not a loft in the riverfront, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I realized that the silence here was not empty. It was clean. They called me dry. They called me a calculator. They called me boring. Fine. I stood up and walked to my desk. I opened my laptop and woke it from sleep mode. The glow of the screen illuminated my face. If they wanted to treat me like a business transaction, I would give them the most professional experience of their lives. I was going to audit the Parker family, and in my line of work, when an asset becomes a liability, you do not fix it. You liquidate it. I cracked my knuckles. The sound loud in the quiet room. It was time to close the account. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in my apartment. It was 3:00 in the morning. Most people turn to comfort food or alcohol when their world fractures. But I turned to Excel. Spreadsheets were my sanctuary. They were clean grids where cause equaled effect, where liabilities could be isolated, and where the truth could not hide behind a mother's guilt trip or a sister's tears. I had spent the last 5 hours dissecting my finances with the cold precision of a coroner performing an autopsy. I started a new workbook. I named the first tab the hemorrhage. I began with the obvious expenses, the ones I had knowingly agreed to. There was the car insurance for my father. Carrie, that was $212 a month. There was the supplemental health insurance for my mother, Diane, which was $450 a month. Then there were the incidentals, the Netflix account, the family cell phone plan, which included 4 lines and unlimited data for Belle's constant social media uploads. That was another $300. But as I dug deeper into the statements from the last 18 months, the numbers began to tell a different story. I pulled up the transaction history for the credit card I had given my father for emergencies only. The definition of emergency in the Parker household had apparently been expanded to include unparalleled luxuries. I saw charges for a steakhouse in downtown Chicago on a Tuesday night, $400. I saw a charge for a boutique spa in the Gold Coast, $350. I saw a recurring subscription to a Wine of the Month club, $80. I entered every single line item into my spreadsheet. I categorized them. I color-coded them, and then I created a pivot table to sum the total cost of my family's existence over the last year and a half. The number at the bottom of the column made me blink. It was not just support. It was a salary. I was paying $40, $2,000 a year to keep my parents and sister afloat. That was a teacher's salary. That was a down payment on a house. I sat back in my chair, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I had been walking around feeling proud that I could help, while they were bleeding me dry and laughing about the quality of my blood. But there was one charge that did not make sense. It was the one I had noticed in the hallway at work, the one that had triggered this entire investigation. Riverfront Luxury Management. I looked at the transaction details. It was listed as a recurring payment for HOA fees and maintenance search charges. The amount varied slightly each month, but averaged around $600. This was separate from the massive rent payment I had discovered earlier. I frowned. Why was I paying homeowners association fees? Bell was renting. Renters do not pay HOA fees. Owners do. If I was paying Bell's rent, the landlord should be covering the HOA unless the lease was structured as a net lease, which was incredibly rare for a residential apartment. I navigated to the folder on my hard drive where I kept my own investment records. I had been buying real estate for the last 7 years, small properties mostly, but I had expanded recently. Because of my job at Cresvale, I had to be careful about conflicts of interest. So I held my properties through a series of anonymous limited liability companies. I barely looked at the day-to-day operations. I paid a management firm to handle the tenants and just looked at the quarterly returns. I opened the file for Parker Holdings, LLC, a shell company I had set up 3 years ago. I scrolled through the portfolio. There was a duplex in Madison, a commercial strip mall in the suburbs, and then a purchase I had made 2 years ago and almost forgotten about because it was a pre-construction buy. The Foundry Lofts, Unit 4B, Riverfront District. I stopped breathing. I switched tabs back to the photo Belle had sent me 6 months ago, the one where she was holding a glass of champagne in her new living room. I zoomed in on the front door visible in the background. The brass number on the door was 4B. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was not just paying Belle's rent. I was her landlord. I closed my eyes, trying to reconstruct the timeline. 2 years ago, I bought the unit as an investment. I handed it over to a management company called Urban Key to find a tenant. 6 months ago, Belle told me she found a dream loft. She sent me a lease agreement from a management company, Urban Key, and asked me to co-sign and set up the payments because she was having trouble with the bank. I had signed it. I had signed the document without looking at the property address closely because I was in the middle of a merger at work, and I trusted my sister. The irony was so sharp it almost cut. I was paying the mortgage on the condo. I was paying the HOA fees on the condo, and I was also paying the rent on the condo to a management company that then took a 10% cut and deposited the rest back into my own LLC account. I was laundering my own money to support my sister, losing 10% in fees every month just so she could pretend to own a home that I actually owned. But if I was the owner, I should be seeing the rent deposits. I opened the ledger for Parker Holdings, LLC. I looked at the income column for Unit 4B, January 0, February 0, March 0. I stared at the screen. Belle had not paid rent in 3 months. I checked my personal checking account again, the one I used to pay her bills. The auto pay for the rent had gone out. $4,200 every month. Where was the money going? I grabbed my phone. It was almost 4 in the morning, but I did not care. I dialed the emergency number for Urban Key Property Management. A groggy voice answered on the third ring. This is the after-hours line for Urban Key. Is this a maintenance emergency? "This is Harper Parker," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I am the owner of Unit 4B at the Foundry Lofts. I am looking at my owner statement and it shows no rental income for 90 days, but I am also the guarantor for the tenant, Belle Parker, and I see withdrawals leaving my personal account for the rent every month. Explain to me where that money is." There was the sound of typing on the other end. The grouchiness vanished from the agent's voice. "One moment, Ms. Parker. Let me pull up the file." I waited. The silence stretched for a full minute. "Okay," the agent said, sounding nervous. "I see the issue. The tenant Belle Parker stopped making direct payments 3 months ago per the lease agreement. When the primary tenant defaults, the system automatically bills the guarantor. That is you." "Yes," I said. "I see that. So the money left my personal account. Why is it not in my owner account?" The agent cleared his throat. "Because, Ms. Parker, the account is in arrears. The tenant racked up $5,000 in damage fees and unauthorized alteration penalties. She apparently tried to install a hot tub on the balcony without a permit, and she painted the exposed brick white, which is a violation of the Historic Preservation Clause." I closed my eyes. Of course she did. The system applied your guarantor payments to cover the fines and the damages first. The agent continued. "The rent is still technically unpaid. We were preparing to issue an eviction notice next week, but since the guarantor payments kept clearing, the system kept the lease active. So," I summarized, my voice flat, "I am paying $4,000 a month to repair damage to my own property caused by a tenant who is living there for free and who happens to be my sister." "Technically, yes," the agent said, "and who is listed as the contact for the tenant." I asked Belle Parker. The agent said, "And does the tenant know who the owner of the unit is?" "No, ma'am," the agent replied. "We operate under a blind management agreement as per your instructions when you signed on with us. The tenant only sees Urban Key as the landlord." "Thank you," I said. "Do not issue the eviction notice yet. I will handle this." I hung up. I sat there in the dark, the rage simmering down into something harder, something like steel. Belle was living in my house. She was destroying my property. She was using my money to pay for the damage she caused, all while telling her friends at brunch how successful she was. She thought she was the queen of the castle. She did not realize she was squatting in the dungeon, and I held the only key. I went back to the spreadsheet. I added a new tab. I named it the eviction. I was about to close the laptop when my email chimed. A notification slid onto the top right corner of the screen. It was from my primary bank, the one where I held my savings and my high-limit credit cards. Subject: action required. Verification for credit line increase. I clicked it open. "Dear Harper, we received a request to increase the credit limit on your Platinum Rewards card from $50,000 to $100,000. To process this request, we need to verify your income." We attempted to call the phone number on file ending in 4545, but got no answer. My blood froze. My phone number ended in 8900. The number ending in 4545 belonged to my mother, Diane. I read the email again. Someone had logged into my banking profile, changed the contact phone number to my mother's cell, and then requested a massive credit increase. They were not just spending my money anymore. They were trying to expand their capacity to spend it. They were trying to double their debt ceiling before I caught on. I looked at the timestamp on the request. It was sent 2 hours ago. They were doing this in the middle of the night, likely while sitting together, maybe even using Belle's laptop in the loft that I owned. I imagined them there, Diane with a glass of wine, telling Belle to click the button. "Just ask for it, honey. She won't notice." She never notices. I reached for my phone again. I did not call my mother. I did not call Belle. I called the bank's fraud department. "I am not a victim," I whispered to the empty room. "I am the auditor, and the audit is now finished." It was time to issue the report. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone across the room. I did not even cry. The time for emotional processing had expired the moment I saw my mother's phone number listed as the verification contact for a credit line increase I had not requested. In the world of risk analysis, when you identify a breach, you do not ask the hacker why they did it. You shut down the port. You isolate the server. You kill the connection. I spent the next 45 minutes in a state of icy hyperfocus. I logged into the websites of the 3 major credit bureaus. One by one, I froze my credit reports. I placed a fraud alert on my Social Security number. I navigated through the labyrinthine security settings of every bank account, investment portfolio, and retirement fund I owned. I changed every password to a randomized string of 20 characters that even I would not be able to memorize. I enabled two-factor authentication on everything, ensuring that the only way to access a single cent of my money was to physically hold the phone in my hand. It was a digital lockdown. I was boarding up the windows of my financial house while my family was still trying to pick the lock on the front door. When the digital wall was built, I picked up the phone. It was 5:00 in the morning. I knew my mother would be awake. Diane never slept well. She claimed it was because of her sensitive constitution, but I always suspected it was because maintaining a web of lies required constant vigilance. I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice grubby but alert. "Hello, is everything okay?" I did not waste time with pleasantries. "I just got an alert from the bank." I said. My voice was calm, almost conversational. "Someone tried to increase the limit on my platinum card to $100,000, and they changed the verification number to your cell phone." There was a pause on the other end, a long, heavy silence. Then I heard the rustle of sheets and a sigh that sounded more annoyed than guilty. "Oh, Harper," Diane said. Her tone was dismissive, the way one speaks to a child who is upset about a dropped ice cream cone. "It was just a procedural thing. We needed to put a deposit down for the venue for Belle's launch party next month. You know, the bank takes forever to approve these things if you do it the normal way. I was just going to approve it, put the deposit down, and then switch it back. It is not a big deal. It is identity theft." "Diane," I said, "stop using legal words." She snapped. "It is family. We are not strangers stealing your wallet in an alley. We are your parents. Your sister needs this launch to go well. If she gets this venue, she gets press. If she gets press, she gets investors. We are doing this for her future. Why do you have to make everything so difficult?" "I am not making it difficult." I said. "I am making it impossible." I froze my credit. "Mom, the request was denied and I changed the passwords. You are locked out." The phone went silent again. Then her voice changed. It dropped an octave, becoming sharp and accusatory. "How did you know so fast?" she asked. "The email only went out a few hours ago. Were you checking your accounts at 3:00 in the morning, or have you been snooping?" I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. She was committing felony fraud, and her concern was that I was invading her privacy by monitoring my own bank account. "I pay attention," I said. "That is my job." "You are being paranoid," she hissed. "You have always been like this, hoarding your money, watching us like a hawk. It is ugly, Harper. It is unbecoming." I hung up. I stared at the phone. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of the confrontation. I had expected denial. I had expected an apology. I had not expected her to double down. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was my father. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Harper Gary's voice was a whisper. I could hear the faint sound of the television in the background. He was likely in the den, hiding from Diane. "Hi, Dad," I said. "Listen," he said, his voice rushing. "Your mother is really upset. She is pacing around the kitchen. She says you cut us off. I secured my accounts." "Dad," I corrected, "I did not cut you off. I stopped you from committing fraud against me." I know," he said, and I could visualize him rubbing his forehead, a nervous tic he had had for decades. "But you have to understand, we are under a lot of pressure. The bills are piling up. Belle is so close to breaking through. If we can just float her for another 6 months, she will pay it all back. I promise. She will pay every cent. She has not paid rent in 3 months." "Dad," I said. He faltered. "You know about that." "I know everything." I said. I know about the rent. I know about the damages to the loft. I know about the credit card limits. Harper, please, he pleaded, just do not make a scene. Do not make this a legal thing. We can work this out. Just unlock the card for a week. Just 1 week. I will make sure she pays. I just want peace. Harper, can't you just give us peace? I felt a crack in my chest. My father did not want peace. He wanted silence. He wanted me to absorb the cost of his wife's ambition and his daughter's entitlement so he could watch his television without hearing them scream. He was willing to sacrifice my financial future to buy himself a quiet afternoon. I cannot do that, Dad. I said the answer is no. I hung up on him, too. I went to the shower. I stood under the scalding water for 20 minutes, scrubbing my skin as if I could wash away the feeling of being used. When I got out, I checked my phone. There was a text message from Belle. It was a long block of text devoid of punctuation, a stream of consciousness that she had likely typed with her thumbs while lying in the bed that I paid for. You are being so sensitive. OMG, it was just a limit increase. We weren't going to use the whole thing. You have all that money sitting there doing nothing. And I am out here trying to build a brand and a legacy for this family. But you don't get it because you have no vision. You just have a salary. I have to look a certain way to get clients. Harper, you can wear cheap suits and nobody cares, but I am a public figure. You helping us is your blessing. It is the only way you contribute to something bigger than yourself. So, stop acting like a victim. I read it twice. You helping us is your blessing. That was it. That was the core of their philosophy. They truly believed that my money was the price I paid for the privilege of being related to them. They thought they were doing me a favor by letting me finance their delusions. I did not reply. I did not block her. I took a screenshot. I added it to the folder named The Truth. At 9:00 sharp, I walked into the office of Alina Russo. Alina was a forensic accountant and civil litigator whom I had met at a conference 3 years ago. She was sharp, terrifyingly efficient, and had a reputation for destroying people who tried to hide assets in divorce proceedings. I sat down in her office, placed my laptop on her desk, and opened the spreadsheets. I need you to look at this, I said. Alina put on her glasses and leaned in. She scrolled through the tabs. She looked at the pivot tables. She looked at the screenshots of the unauthorized autopays and the credit limit request. She looked at the lease agreement for the loft and the payment history of the LLC. After 10 minutes, she sat back and took off her glasses. Harper, she said, her voice grave, this is not just a family dispute. This is grand larceny. This is identity theft. This is wire fraud. I know, I said. What do you want to do? She asked. Do you want to file a police report? I hesitated. The part of me that was still a daughter, the part that remembered my father teaching me to ride a bike, flinched. Putting my parents in handcuffs was a line I was not sure I could cross yet. It would destroy them. My father would lose his pension. My mother would be a pariah. Not yet, I said. I want to sever the limb before I kill the patient. I want to stop the bleeding. I want to legally insulate myself so completely that they cannot touch a single penny of mine ever again, and I want them out of my property. Alina nodded. She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her. Okay, she said, here is the strategy. First, we send a formal cease and desist letter regarding the use of your identity. We notify the banks formally of the fraudulent attempt so it is on the record, but we declined to press charges for the moment, citing a family resolution in progress that protects your credit score without sending the police to their door immediately. Second, she continued, writing in sharp, angular strokes, the loft you are the owner through the LLC. Belle is the tenant. She is in default. We issue a 3-day notice to pay or quit. That is the law in this state. If she does not pay the full arrears, which she won't, we file for eviction on day 4. No more autopay from your personal account. We cancel that authorization today. Third, we draft a formal settlement agreement. You present them with a bill. You likely won't get the money back, but having the debt acknowledged in writing creates a legal boundary. If they try to borrow money in your name again, this document proves a pattern of financial abuse. It sounded clean. It sounded clinical. It was exactly what I wanted. Elena paused. She was looking at the bank statements I had provided, specifically a scan of a document I had found in my father's email, which I had access to because I had set it up for him 10 years ago. "Wait a minute," Elena said. She squinted at the paper. "What is this?" I leaned over. It was a property tax statement from my parents' house, the house I grew up in. "It looks like a tax bill." I said. "No." Elena said, "Look at the status. It says deferred, payment plan active, and look at the collecant listed at the bottom." I looked. There in small print was my name, Harper Parker, and next to it was a signature. It was a digital squiggle, clearly a copy-paste job from some other document, but it was meant to be mine. "They filed for a tax deferment program," Elena said, her voice hard. "In this county, you can defer property taxes if you claim financial hardship, but you need a guarantor with income to secure the eventual payment. They used your income to qualify for the deferment, but they forged your signature to approve the liability." "What does that mean?" I asked, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "It means," Elena said, looking me in the eye, "that if they stop paying the taxes, which it looks like they have, the county does not just foreclose on their house. They come after you for the full back amount, plus interest, plus penalties. And because you are listed as a guarantor, it is a lien against your assets." I stared at the document. My parents had not just stolen my cash. They had attached a ticking time bomb to my financial identity. If their house went under, it would drag me down with it. "Can we prove I did not sign it?" I asked. Elena tapped the signature. "We can prove it is a digital forgery, but it will take time, and it means we have to alert the county assessor that your parents committed fraud against the government. That is not a civil matter, Harper. That is tax fraud. That is jail time." I sat back, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on my shoulders. My mother had called me paranoid. She had called me selfish, all while she was effectively framing me for her own debts. "Do not report it to the county yet," I said finally. "I need to use this." "You see how Elena asked as leverage." I said, "I am going to give them a choice. They can leave the loft quietly, and they can sign a document releasing me from all financial obligations, or I will hand this piece of paper to the district attorney." Elena looked at me with a newfound respect. "That is a hard line, Harper." I stood up and gathered my papers. "I am not soft and more, Elena. I am just solid." I left her office and drove back to my apartment. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the highway. I felt exhausted, but my mind was clear. I walked into my quiet beige living room. I sat down on my paid-for sofa. I opened my laptop and navigated to the secure folder. I clicked on the audio file voicemail echo of MP3. I dragged the slider to the end. I needed to hear it one last time. I needed to burn the bridge completely so I would never be tempted to turn back. As long as she keeps paying the bills, let her think she is respected. I listened to my mother's laugh. I listened to my father's silence. I listened to my sister's arrogance. Then I closed the file. I moved it into a new subfolder I had created inside the truth. I named the subfolder Evidence for Trial. I was done paying. It was time for them to receive the invoice. They say that a lie can travel halfway around the world, while the truth is still putting on its shoes. In the case of the Parker family, the lie did not just travel. It sprinted. It took a private jet. It had a marketing budget. I had spent 48 hours building a legal fortress, securing my accounts, and freezing my credit. I thought I was moving fast. But while I was dealing with banks and lawyers, my mother was dealing with the court of public opinion. She knew she could not win on the math, so she decided to win on the narrative. It started with a text from my Aunt Linda on Thursday morning. Linda lived in Ohio and usually only messaged me to ask how to convert a PDF to a Word document. "Harper, I know you are under a lot of stress at work, but please call your mother. She has been crying all morning. You are an educated woman. Why are you choosing to be so cruel?" I stared at the screen. Cruel. That was the word they had chosen. Not robbed, not defrauded, but cruel. I did not reply. A few hours later, I saw the notification from Instagram. Belle had posted a photo. It was a moody black and white shot of her looking out the window of the loft I owned. The loft I paid for with a caption that was a masterclass in vague victimhood. Sometimes you have to cut out the toxicity even when it shares your DNA. It hurts when people you trust use their power to make you feel small. I am choosing peace over money today. I am choosing art over spreadsheets. Family trauma rising above toxic. The comments were already flooding in. Stay strong, Queen. You do not need that negative energy. Money reveals who people really are. Babe, I sat at my desk at Cressvale watching the likes tick up. They were painting a portrait of me as the rich, heartless sister who dangled money over their heads for control. They were effectively inoculating themselves against the truth. If I spoke up now and said, she stole from me, the audience was already primed to hear, she is obsessing over money again. I put the phone down and tried to focus on a risk assessment report for a logistics company in Nevada, but the war was not staying on social media. It was coming for my paycheck. At 2 in the afternoon, my internal chat pinged. It was Sarah from the Compliance and Ethics Department. Harper, do you have a minute? We need to discuss an email we received to the anonymous tick line. My stomach dropped, but my face remained impassive. I walked to the glass-walled office of the compliance director. Sarah looked uncomfortable. She slid a printed email across the desk. To whom it may concern, it has come to my attention that your employee, Harper Parker, is engaging in undisclosed real estate transactions that conflict with Cressvale's client interests. She is funneling money through shell companies to family members and using insider knowledge to secure loans. A person with such ethical lapses should not be handling sensitive portfolios. It was anonymous, of course, but the phrasing funneling money, shell companies, these were buzzwords. Belle had heard me use or terms Diane had picked up from watching crime dramas. They were trying to get me fired. They knew that if I lost my job, I would lose my power. They were trying to cut off the supply line at the source. I looked up at Sarah. I did not get defensive. I did not panic. I'd opened my portfolio folder which I had brought with me. This is retaliation. Sarah, I said calmly, I am currently in the process of separating my finances from my family due to identity theft. I can provide you with the documentation of the LLCs which were fully disclosed on my annual conflict of interest forms. I can also show you the police report I am preparing to file regarding the fraudulent credit inquiries made in my name. I laid out the papers, the lease agreement, the unauthorized autopay records, the credit freeze confirmation. Sarah read through them, her eyebrows climbing higher with every page. So Sarah said, tapping the anonymous email, this is essentially a domestic dispute spilling into the corporate server. Yes, I said, and I apologize that it reached you. It will not happen again. It better not, she said, handing the papers back. At Harper, you are clear. This is obviously a nuisance report. We will flag the sender's IP address if they try it again. I walked back to my desk. I was safe, but I was shaking. They had tried to kill my career. They had aimed for the jugular. This was no longer a disagreement about bills. This was total war. That evening, my father called. I debated ignoring it, but I needed to know their next move. I answered on the speakerphone, keeping my hands free to type notes. Harper, Gary said. His voice was heavy, laden with the performance of a weary peacekeeper. Hello, Dad. This has gone too far, he said. The internet, the emails, it is all just noise. We need to stop this before it breaks the family apart permanently. You tried to get me fired, Dad. I said, I did not know about that, he said quickly. Too quickly. That was an impulse. Your mother was upset. Belle was scared. People do crazy things when they are scared. I am scared too. Dad, I said I am scared that my own parents are trying to bankrupt me. Please, he said, just come over. Come to the house just for an hour. No yelling, no lawyers, just us. Let's sit down and fix this. I miss my daughter. It was the bait. I knew it was bait. But I also knew that if I did not go, they would use my absence as proof of my coldness. And I needed to look them in the eye. I needed them to see that the daughter they thought they could bully had been replaced by someone else. I will be there in an hour, I said. I drove to the suburbs. The house I grew up in looked exactly the same. Came the manicured lawn, the beige siding, the wreath on the door. It looked like a home. But as I walked up the driveway, I felt like I was walking into a deposition. Gary opened the door. He tried to hug me, but I stiffened and he pulled back, looking hurt. He led me into the living room. It was not a private talk. Diane was sitting in her high-backed armchair, holding a glass of white wine like a scepter. Belle was curled up on the sofa, clutching a throw pillow, her face scrubbed clean of makeup to look younger, more vulnerable. It was an ambush, a soft ambush, designed to make me feel outnumbered and outgunned. "Sit down, Harper," Diane said. She did not say hello. I sat on the ottoman, keeping a distance from them. I placed my purse on my lap. "We are all hurting," Gary began, standing in the middle of the room like a mediator who had already been bribed by one side. "But we are family and families forgive." Diane took a sip of wine. "We are willing to overlook the invasion of privacy." She said her voice was magnanimous, as if she were granting a pardon. "Excuse me?" I asked. "The voicemail," she said, narrowing her eyes. "You listened to a private conversation. You recorded it. That is illegal in some states. Harper, it is a violation of trust, but we understand that you were triggered, so we are not going to hold it against you." I almost laughed. They were darvoing me. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. It was a classic manipulation tactic. I did not record a private conversation. I said, keeping my voice level, "I received a voicemail. You called me. You left the message. You could have deleted it." Belle sent from the sofa. Her voice was thick with tears. "You listened to it. You kept it because you wanted to hurt yourself. You wanted to find a reason to hate us. I found the reason." "Belle," I said, "it was when you said, 'As long as she pays, let her think she is respected.'" "That was a joke," Belle shouted, sitting up. "God, you are so literal. We were just venting. Do you know how hard it is to be me? Do you know the pressure I am under? I have to maintain an image. I have to sell a lifestyle. You have it easy. You just sit in a cubicle and the money appears. I have to create magic out of thin air and you use my money to do it." I said, "So what?" Diane snapped. "It is family money. We raised you. We paid for your college. I paid for my college. I cut in. I had scholarships and I worked 3 jobs. You paid for Belle's acting classes." Diane waved her hand, dismissing history. "The point is, you have excess. Your sister has need. It is the duty of the strong to carry the weak. But instead of carrying her, you dropped her. You cut off the auto pay. You froze the cards. Do you know how embarrassing it was for your father when his card was declined at the hardware store today? It should be embarrassing." I said. "He is 60 years old, and he is spending his daughter's money on things he cannot afford." Diane slammed her glass down on the coaster. "Enough," she said. "Here is the condition. You will apologize for spying on us. You will apologize for the stress you caused your sister. You will reactivate the autopay for the loft for 6 more months. Just 6 months until Belle closes her seed round. And you will unlock the credit card for emergency use only. If you do that, we will stop talking to the relatives. We will take down the posts. We will be a family again." I looked at them. I looked at my father, who was studying the carpet. I looked at Belle, who was watching me, with a mix of fear and entitlement. I looked at my mother, who looked like a queen waiting for her tribute. "No," I said. The room went silent. "No," Diane repeated. "No apologies," I said. "No autopay. No credit cards. The Bank of Harper is closed permanently." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. "This is the new arrangement," I said. I placed the folder on the coffee table. "It is a written agreement. It outlines a repayment plan for the $40,000 you have spent in the last year. It also includes a move-out schedule for the loft. Belle, you have 30 days to vacate." Belle let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. "You are kicking me out. I am evicting a tenant who has not paid rent," I said. "You cannot do that," Belle screamed. She stood up, throwing the pillow on the floor. "It is my home. I designed it. I picked the paint. You picked the paint that violated the lease." I noted. "You are a monster," Diane hissed. "You are trying to destroy your sister because you are jealous of her. You have always been jealous. You are boring, Harper. You are empty, and you want everyone else to be as miserable as you are." I stood up. I felt lighter than I had in years. I am not miserable. Mom, I am just done paying for your theater tickets. I turned to leave. Gary stepped forward, reaching for my arm. Harper, wait. Do not touch me. Dad, I said quietly. I walked toward the door. Behind me, the sound of Belle's weeping filled the room. But just as I reached the hallway, Belle screamed something that made me freeze. It is not fair, she shrieked. That loft was supposed to be mine anyway. It would be in my name if you had not hidden the paperwork. I stopped. I turned around slowly. What did you say? I asked. Belle was standing there, her face red and blotchy, her chest heaving. You heard me? She yelled. Mom told me. She told me you bought that place with the inheritance from Grandma. That money was supposed to be split between us, but you manipulated the executive and kept it all so you could buy properties and lord them over me. That loft is technically half mine. You stole my inheritance. I stared at her. Then I looked at Diane. Diane's face had drained of color. She picked up her wine glass, her hand trembling slightly. Inheritance, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Grandma died with $12,000 in debt. There was no inheritance. I paid for her funeral. Belle looked confused. She looked at Diane. But you said I did not say that. Diane muttered, looking away. You misunderstood. No. Mambriel shouted, desperate to win the argument. You told me. You said Harper used the family trust to buy the investments. You said she was holding the loft for me until I was ready to take over the title. That is why I didn't pay rent. I thought I was paying like mortgage equity. The room fell into a dead silence. The truth dropped like a stone. Diane had not just told Belle I was mean. She had told Belle I was a thief. She had invented an entire fictional inheritance to explain why I had money and Belle did not. Rather than admitting that one daughter worked and the other did not, she had fed Belle a lie so comforting that Belle felt morally justified in stealing from me. Belle was not just entitled. She had been defrauded too by our mother. I looked at Diane. She refused to meet my eyes. There was no trust. Belle, I said, my voice flat. There was no money. I earned every dollar. Mom lied to you. She lied to make you feel better about being broke. And she used me as the villain to do it. Belle looked at me, then at Diane. The doubt was creeping into her eyes, fracturing the narrative she had lived in for years. Mambriel asked, her voice small. I opened the door. You have 30 days. Belle, I said, and asked Mom about the property tax deferment while you are at it. Ask her whose signature is on that. I walked out into the cool night air. I did not look back. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away. The ambush had failed. They had tried to break me, but instead they had cracked the foundation of their own lie. And now I just had to wait for the whole house to come down. The following Monday morning did not begin with a bang. It began with the soft, satisfying click of a mouse button. Revenge, I was learning, was not about setting fires. It was about removing the oxygen. I sat at my desk at Crestdale Asset Group, a cup of black coffee steaming next to my keyboard. On my screen was a draft email addressed to the senior account manager at Urban Key Property Management. I had spent the weekend refining the language with Elena, my lawyer. It was devoid of emotion. It contained no adjectives describing my heartbreak or my family's betrayal. It was a document of pure statutory compliance. Subject notice to pay, rent, or quit. Unit 4B. Please proceed with the formal issuance of the 30-day notice to the tenant. Belle Parker, as the guarantor and owner of the LLC, I am formally notifying you that no further payments will be authorized from my personal accounts to cover the errors. If the balance of $12,600 is not settled by the tenant within the statutory period, please initiate eviction proceedings immediately. I hit send. There was no thunderclap, just a small notification in the corner of the screen that said message sent. Next, I opened my banking portal. I navigated to the bill pay section. For years, this list had looked like a scroll of my family's needs. Gary Parker, auto insurance, Diane Parker, Nordstrom card, Parker family, Verizon wireless, Belle Parker, student loan consolidation. One by one, I clicked the trash can icon next to each pay. Are you sure you want to delete this recurring payment? The system asked. Yes, 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 and yes. By 8:30 in the morning, I had severed every financial artery connecting me to them. I kept my own mortgage, my own utilities, and my own insurance active. Everything else was now the problem of the people who actually used the services. The reaction time was faster than I expected. At 10:15, my phone buzzed. It was Diane. I let it go to voicemail. At 10:20, it buzzed again. Diane. At 10:30, a text message appeared. The card was declined at the pharmacy. I am trying to pick up your father's blood pressure medication. This is dangerous, Harper. You are putting his health at risk. I stared at the message. It was a lie. Of course, my father's medication was fully covered by his veterans' benefits. The COI was zero. The only thing she would need a credit card for at the pharmacy was the high-end cosmetics aisle located next to the dispensary. I typed a reply, my fingers moving calmly over the glass. Dad has VA coverage. The COI is zero. If you are buying something else, you will need to use your own debit card. The typing bubble appeared instantly, agitated and erratic. He needs a specific supplement. The VA does not cover. How dare you nickel and dime his health? Unfreeze the card right now. No, I replied. The card is closed. I reported it lost. It was the truth. I had called the issuer on Saturday and reported the card lost, instructing them to issue a new number and mail the physical card to my apartment in Milwaukee, not my parents' house. 30 minutes later, my father called. I answered this time. Harper, he said, his voice low and shaky. I was in the middle of the aisle at Home Depot. I had a cart full of lumber. Why are you buying lumber, Dad? I asked. The deck is fine. I promised Bob from down the street I would help him rebuild his gazebo. Gary said. I told him I would pick up the materials and he could pay me back later. It was a pride thing, Harper. I looked like a fool when the cashier cut the card in half. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. My father was using my credit line to act as a bank for his friends. He was financing his social standing with my labor. I am sorry you were embarrassed, Dad, I said, but that is what happens when you spend money you do not have. You have changed, he said, his voice hardening. You used to be kind. I used to be a doormat. I corrected. Now I am just a daughter. I hung up. By the afternoon, the assault shifted fronts. Belle entered the chat. She did not scream. She did not use all caps. She tried a tactic she had likely read about in a negotiation book. Harper, the message read, I have been thinking. I know we got off on the wrong foot with the inheritance misunderstanding. Mom explained it to me. I get it. You've earned the money. Fine. I waited. But you have to understand that kicking me out of the loft will ruin my brand. I have a meeting with a venture capital firm next week. If I am homeless, I lose my leverage. So here is the deal. You pay the rent for 3 more months. Just 3. I will sign a promissory note to pay you back with 5% interest once my funding comes through. It is a business deal. Take the emotion out of it. It was almost impressive. She was trying to pivot from spoiled child to business partner without skipping a beat. I replied, I already have a business deal. It is called a lease. You broke it. You have 30 days. Her response was immediate and vicious. Fine. Be that way. Just so you know, Aunt Linda is coming to town next week. I am going to tell her everything. I am going to tell her you are mentally unstable and that you cut off Dad's medicine. I will ruin your reputation in this family. Harper, you will be alone. I am already alone, I whispered to myself, and I prefer it. I did not reply to her threat. Instead, I went back to my work. I was analyzing a portfolio for a client who wanted to invest in commercial real estate. I was reviewing lease agreements, checking for clauses that protected the landlord. Something in the legal ease triggered a memory. I opened the folder on my desktop named Evidence for Trial. I pulled up the PDF of the original lease for the loft, the one Belle had sent me 2 years ago, asking me to co-sign. I zoomed in on the signature page. There was my signature, Harper Parker. It looked right. It had the little loop on the P that I always did. But as I zoomed in closer, past 400%, the edges of the ink became jagged. They were pixelated. I opened a recent document I had signed digitally using a secure service. The lines were smooth, vector-based. I opened the property tax deferment document my lawyer had found, the one my parents had filed to avoid paying taxes on their house. I placed the two signatures side by side on my dual monitors. They were identical, not just similar, identical. No person signs their name exactly the same way twice. There are always microscopic variations in pressure and angle, but these two signatures overlaid perfectly. They had not just forged my signature on the tax document. They had scanned my signature from an old birthday card or a check, saved it as an image file, and they had been pasting it onto legal documents for years. The lease for the loft was not valid. I had never actually consigned it. They had stolen my identity to make me the guarantor. Technically, this meant I could walk away. I could tell the management company the signature was a forgery and refuse to pay another cent, but that would trigger a fraud investigation that would lead straight to Belle and my parents. I sat back, my heart hammering. I had the nuclear codes. If I gave this to the police, my mother and sister would go to prison for forgery and identity theft. I called Eleanor. I found the source of the signature. I said, it is a Copic job. They have a digital file of my autograph, and they are using it like a stamp. Good. Eleanor said, her voice sharp. Keep that file safe. Do not send it to the police yet. Why not? I asked. They committed a felony. Because Eleanor said, right now, it is a chaotic mess of family drama. If you go to the police today, your mother will cry to the investigator. Say it was a misunderstanding. Say you gave verbal permission. It becomes that he said, she said. We need them to admit it. We need them to confirm they did it without your consent. We need one clean piece of evidence that proves intent to defraud. I understood. I needed a confession. That afternoon, the meeting request popped up on my calendar. It was from the managing director of Cressville, Mr. Henderson. I walked into his office bracing myself. Had another anonymous email come through? Was I being placed on leave, Harper? Mr. Henderson said, gesturing to the chair. He was a man of few words, known for his ruthlessness in deal-making. Sir, I asked. The compliance team briefed me on the situation with the anonymous report, he said. He picked up a file. We looked into the source. It was sent from a residential IP address registered to A.L. Parker. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I am so sorry, sir. Don't be, he said, waving a hand. It actually brought your file to my attention. I reviewed your performance records for the last 5 years. You have the highest accuracy rating in the risk assessment division. You spotted the liquidity crisis in that tech merger last month when everyone else missed it. I nodded, unsure where this was going. We are launching a new fund, Mr. Henderson said. Distressed assets. We need someone who can look at a messy balance sheet and find the truth without getting emotional. Someone who can make hard calls. I want you to lead it. I blinked. Lead it. It comes with a 20% raise in a new office. He said, and Harper. Yes, sir. Integrity is a currency, he said. Your sister tried to bankrupt yours, but she only proved that you have plenty of it. Do not let her win. I walked out of his office floating. Belle had tried to destroy my career, and instead, she had given me the spotlight I had been too humble to ask for. At 5:00, my phone rang. It was Diane. I debated answering, but I was feeling strong. I was a fund manager now. I was the owner of my own life. I picked up. Hello, Mother Harper. Diane said her voice was different. It was not angry. It was not weepy. It was terrifyingly calm. We need to talk, she said, face to face. I have nothing to say to you, I said. Pleased, she said. Just dinner. Your father is a wreck. Belle is packing boxes and crying. We cannot end like this. We are family. I want to take you to Lodgerton tonight. Just the 4 of us. No fighting, just a meal. If you still want to walk away after tonight, we will not stop you, but give us one chance to say goodbye properly. Ledgerden was the most expensive restaurant in the city. It was where people went to be seen. It was where Diane went when she wanted to play the role of the grand matriarch. I knew it was a trap. I knew they wanted a stage. They wanted to get me in a public place where I would be too polite to cause a scene, and then they would pressure me to sign the papers they wanted. I checked my schedule. I checked my emotional armor. Fine, I said. 700, but I am driving myself. I hung up. I went home to change. I did not put on the sensible gray suit I usually wore. I put on a sharp black dress I had bought 3 years ago and never worn because Belle had told me it was too aggressive. I put on red lipstick. I looked in the mirror. I did not look like the bank. I looked like the foreclosure agent. As I was grabbing my keys, my phone chimed with a voicemail notification. It was not a missed call. Diane had called me, left a voicemail, and then hung up immediately, likely while I was in the shower. I stood by the door and pressed play. The voice that came through the speaker was low, guttural, stripped of all the public charm she used on her friends. "Harper, I know you're coming tonight. You better fix this. I do not care what you have to do. You will fix the lease and you will sign the tax papers for the house. If you embarrass your sister in front of the waiter, or if you make me look bad tonight, do not call me mother anymore. You will be dead to us. Do not test me." The message ended. I stood there in the silence of my apartment. Do not call me mother anymore. She thought that was a threat. She thought the title of mother was a leash she could yank to bring me to heel. She did not realize that she had just handed me the scissors. I saved the voicemail. I renamed it the ultimatum. I moved it to the folder. Then I walked out the door. I was going to dinner. I was going to sit at their table. And I was going to make sure that by the time the check came, there would be no question about who was paying the price. Le Jardin was the kind of restaurant that charged $30 for a plate of asparagus and called it an experience. The lighting was low, amber, and designed to make jewelry sparkle and wrinkles vanish. The air smelled of truffle oil and expensive perfume. It was a place for celebrations, for engagements, and apparently for public executions disguised as family dinners. I handed my coat to the checkroom attendant and smoothed the fabric of my black dress. I caught my reflection in the gilded mirror by the entrance. The red lipstick was a splash of war paint. I did not look like the Harper who fixed printers and paid bills. I looked like the Harper who assessed risk for a living and decided which assets were worth saving. The maitre led me into the dining room. Of course, Diane had not booked a quiet booth in the corner where we could talk in private. She had secured table 12, the round table right in the center of the room, directly under the crystal chandelier. We were surrounded by the city's elite lawyers, doctors, local politicians. We were on display. My family was already seated. They looked like a tableau from a magazine advertisement for the perfect upper-middle-class life. Gary was wearing his navy blazer, looking anxious. Belle was wearing a soft cream-colored dress that made her look fragile, angelic, and utterly incapable of writing a rent check. Diane was in emerald green, holding court. I approached the table. Gary started to stand up to greet me, but Diane placed a hand on his forearm and he sank back down. "You are late," Diane said. She did not smile. She offered her cheek, but I did not kiss it. I pulled out my own chair and sat down. "I am on time." "Mother," I said, "my reservation was for 7. It is 7. I unfolded my napkin and placed it on my lap. The waiter appeared instantly, pouring water into my crystal goblet. I ordered a glass of Pinot Noir. I needed something to cut the taste of the betrayal that was already thickening the air. "You look intense," Belle said. Her voice was quiet, raspy, as if she had been crying for days. She was playing the role of the wounded bird perfectly. "I look appropriate," I replied. Diane clasped her hands together on the tablecloth. Her nails were freshly manicured, a sharp blood red that matched the floral arrangement in the center of the table. "Let us not start with bickering," Diane said, her voice projecting just loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear the tone of a weary mother dealing with a difficult child. "We are here to heal. We are here because despite everything, we are a family, and families do not destroy each other over clerical errors." "Clerical errors," I repeated. "Is that what we are calling 3 months of unpaid rent and identity theft?" "Lower your voice," Gary hissed, looking around nervously. Diane sighed, a long tragic exhalation. "See, this is what I mean. You are so sharp. Harper, you have always been so sharp. You are brilliant. Truly, we are all so proud of your career, your numbers, your little spreadsheets." She paused, taking a sip of her wine. "But you lack heart, darling," she continued, her eyes cold and hard. You treat people like arithmetic. You think everything is a transaction. You do not understand that love is not about who pays for what. It is about grace. And right now, you are showing absolutely no grace to your sister. I looked at Belle. She was staring at her bread plate, picking at the crust of a roll. I showed grace for 18 months. I said it cost me $42,000. Diane waved her hand dismissively. Money comes and goes, but look at you, Harper. Look at your life. You are 33. You sit in that apartment alone. You have no husband. You have no boyfriend. You have no children. I stiffened. This was the pivot. They were moving from the financial to the personal. They were attacking the one area where I could not produce a receipt to prove my success. What good is all that money if you are cold at night? Diane asked, her voice dripping with faux pity. You are building a fortress, but there is nobody inside it with you. Is that why you are punishing Belle? Because she has a life, because people are drawn to her. I took a slow sip of wine. The liquid was cool and tart. I am not punishing Belle because she is popular. I said, I am evicting her because she is a liability. Belle looked up then, her eyes wet. You are just jealous, she whispered. You have always been jealous. That can walk into a room and make friends and you just stand in the corner judging everyone. You think you are better than us because you pay the bills. But you are just lonely and you are using money to make us pay attention to you. It was a breathtaking inversion of reality. In her mind, my generosity was actually a desperate bid for their attention, and therefore, by taking their money, they were actually doing me a favor. Gary cleared his throat. He looked miserable. Girls, please, he said. Harper, listen to your mother. Nobody wants you to be alone. We just want everyone to get along. If you just help the family, everything is good. When you pay, there is no fighting. Why do you want fighting? I looked at my father. He was practically begging me to let them rob me just so he could eat his dinner in peace. I do not want fighting. Dad, I said, I want boundaries. Belle sat up straighter. She wiped her eyes, shifting gears. The wounded bird was gone. The negotiator had arrived. Look, she said, I have news. Big news. I waited. I am this close to a partnership, she said, holding her thumb and forefinger an inch apart. I cannot say who it is yet, but let us just say there is a ring involved and a merger, a very high-profile merger. She was implying an engagement to a wealthy suitor. It was her favorite card to play the promise of a rich savior who is just around the corner. That is why I need the loft, Mel said, her voice gaining strength. I need to host a dinner there next week for his family. If I am homeless, Harper, if I am living out of boxes, this deal falls apart. And if this deal falls apart, I cannot pay you back. I need us to stand on the same side just for a few more months. Diane reached into her purse. She pulled out a document. It was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. She slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped right next to my wine glass. What is this? I asked. It is a compromise, Diane said. It is a temporary support agreement. We had our family attorney draft it. It says that you will reinstate the auto pay for the loft for 6 months. In exchange, Belle agrees to pay you back 50% of the total within 5 years interest-free, and you agree to apologize for the privacy invasion regarding the voicemail. I stared at the paper. It was not a compromise. It was a surrender. And Diane added, her voice dropping to a whisper, if you sign this, we will forget about the anonymous email you sent to yourself to garner sympathy at work. I blinked. Excuse me. Oh, come on. Harper, Belle scoffed. We know you sent that email to your boss. You wanted to look like a victim so they would give you a promotion. It is classic you. You create a crisis so you can solve it. They were gaslighting me on a level I had not thought possible. They were accusing me of sending the anonymous email that had almost cost me my job. I looked around the table. They were all watching me. Diane with her chin high. Belle with her smirk. Gary looking at his water glass. They were united. They were a wall of delusion. And they expected me to smash myself against it until I broke. But they had made a mistake. They assumed I was still playing by the rules of emotional engagement. They assumed I cared about being understood. I did not pick up the pen. I did not touch the paper. I looked at Belle. Who sent the email to Cresville? I asked. My voice was calm, conversational. Belle rolled her eyes. I just told you you did. No, I said I did not. And since you seem to know so much about it, tell me something. The email accused me of a conflict of interest regarding a specific property. Which property was it? Belle hesitated. She looked at Diane. Diane gave a slight nod, urging her to continue the offensive. It was the loft. Obviously, Belle said, and what did the email say about the money? I asked. It said you were funneling money to family members through shell companies, Belle said quickly, which is exactly what you are doing with those LOCs you hide behind. I felt a cold, sharp satisfaction settle in my chest. That is interesting, I said, because I never told you about the LOCs. I told you I bought the property. I never used the words shell company or LLC when we spoke. Belle froze. Her fork hovered halfway to her mouth, and I continued, leaning forward slightly. The email was sent to the compliance department, specifically to a woman named Sarah. So Belle challenged, though her voice was higher now. So I said, how did you know to send it to Sarah? Her name is not listed on the public website. Her email address is internal. Belle's face went pale. She stammered. I didn't digest. Diane cut in, her voice sharp. What does it matter? Harper, stop interrogating your sister. We are talking about the agreement. Sign the paper. I ignored my mother. I kept my eyes locked on Belle. You sent the email, Belle. You used the term shell companies because you heard me on the phone with my accountant 3 months ago during Thanksgiving. And you sent it to Sarah because you went through my contact list on my iPad when I left it on the counter. I did not, Belle shouted. The heads of the diners at the next table turned. You just admitted you knew the content of the email. I said you quoted it. Funneling money. That phrase was in the text of the message. I never showed you the email. Belle looked trapped. She looked at Gary. Dad, make her stop. Gary looked up, his face gray. Harper, please, not here. I looked at the document on the table, the temporary support agreement. You tried to get me fired. I said my voice was not loud, but it was heavy enough to crack the table. You knew that if I lost my job, I would lose my leverage. You tried to kill my career so you could keep living in a loft you cannot afford. Diane slammed her hand on the table. The silverware jumped. Sign the paper. She hissed. I am your mother, and I am telling you to sign it. If you walk out of here without helping your sister, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? You will have no family. You will be alone in that cold apartment with your money, and nobody will be there when you die. I looked at Diane. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. I looked for a trace of love, of hesitation. There was none. There was only the anger of a manager losing control of an employee. I am already alone. Mom, I said, I have been alone in this family for 20 years. I stood up. Where are you going? Diane demanded. I picked up my purse. I am going to the ladies' room. I said, sit down. Diane commanded. We are not finished. I am, I said. I turned and walked away from the table. I felt their eyes boring into my back. I felt the whispers of the other diners. But for the first time, I did not feel shame. I felt the exhilaration of the escape. I walked into the restroom. It was empty, lined with marble and gold. I locked myself in the stall. My hands were shaking, just a little, not from fear, from the adrenaline of the final cut. I pulled out my phone. I opened the text thread with Elena, my lawyer. We had discussed this possibility. We had a plan for if they refused to confess, a plan for if they doubled down. I typed 3 words. Activate Plan B. I hit send. Plan B was not a negotiation. Plan B was a tactical nuclear strike. It involved the immediate filing of the fraud report regarding the property tax deferment. It involved sending the digital forensic analysis of the forged lease signature to the district attorney, and it involved contacting the real estate investors Belle claimed to be meeting with to inform them of the pending litigation against her. I walked out of the stall. I washed my hands. I reapplied my lipstick. I looked at myself in the mirror. You will be dead to us, Diane had said. I smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was genuine. I was not dead. I was just reborn, and the baby was expensive, angry, and done paying the bill. I walked out of the restroom, but I did not go back to table 12. I walked straight to the mattress. "The bill for table 12," I said. He looked surprised. "Oh, certainly, madam. Shall I bring it to the table?" "No," I said. I pulled out my black credit card, the heavy metal one. "Split the bill." "Split it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I will pay for my glass of wine. The rest of the party is separate." "But they are your family?" he asked, confused. "Not anymore," I said. I tapped the card. I signed the slip for $18. Then I walked out into the cool night air of Madison, leaving them sitting under the crystal chandelier waiting for a check that nobody was coming to pay. The morning after the dinner at El Jardin, the silence from my phone was heavy. There were no more texts from Belle calling me selfish. There were no more voicemails from Diane threatening to disown me. The silence was not peaceful. It was the breathless quiet of people who were waiting for the other shoe to drop. They did not have to wait long. At 9:00, the leader sent me a secure file transfer. The subject line was simply Phase 2 Discovery. I sat in my office at Crespale. With the door closed, I opened the file. It was a public records pull from the county clerk's office, something Elena had dug up while preparing the fraud affidavit regarding the tax deferment. But this was not about taxes. This was a recorded lien against my parents' home, the Bait House in the suburbs where I had grown up. I read the document. My breath hitched. It was a deed of trust for a home equity line of credit taken out 18 months ago. The principal amount was $150,000. My parents had leveraged the equity in their home. That explained the sudden influx of cash for Belle's, branding, and the lavish dinners. But 18 months ago, my father had been complaining about being cash poor. He had told me his credit score was too low to qualify for a loan because of a dispute with a contractor. So, how had they secured a 6F-figure loan? I scrolled to the signature page. There were 3 signatures. Barry Parker, Diane Parker, and there on the line marked co-borrower was Harper Parker. I stared at the screen. The signature was the same digital clone they had used on the loft lease and the tax deferment. It was the same loop on the P, the same jagged pixelation when I zoomed into 400%. But the fraud went deeper than just a cut-and-paste job. I looked at the notary stamp at the bottom of the page. It claimed that all 3 parties had appeared in person before Notary Public in Illinois on October 14th, 2 years ago. October 14th. I opened my work calendar and scrolled back 2 years. October 14th. I stared at the entry Global Risk Summit, San Francisco, California. I had been 2,000 m away. I had been on a panel discussing market volatility at the exact moment my parents were supposedly sitting in a bank in Illinois with me, signing away the equity of their home. I had flight manifests. I had hotel receipts. I had a photo of myself standing in front of the Golden Gate Bridge. Time stamped on that very afternoon. They had not just forged my signature. They had likely bribed or manipulated a notary. Or perhaps Diane had impersonated me using an old ID I had left at the house. This was not just civil fraud. This was bank fraud. This was federal. I picked up the phone. I did not call my parents. I called the fraud department of the regional bank that held the lien. My voice was steady, the voice of a woman who deals in facts. "My name is Harper Parker." I told the investigator on the line I am looking at a loan document with my name on it, number 8940. I need to report that I was not present for this signing. I was in California. I can prove it with TSA records. The investigator paused. I could hear the clicking of his keyboard. "Ma'am," he said, his tone shifting from bored to alert. "If you are claiming you did not sign this, we have to open a level 1 investigation. This freezes the asset immediately. It triggers a review of the notary's logbook. If the borrowers are your family, you understand this becomes a criminal referral." "I understand." I said, "Open the file." I hung up. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted, the weight of protecting them. I had spent my whole life being their shield. Now I was stepping aside and letting the arrows hit the targets they were aimed at while the bank began its internal churning. The world outside remained oblivious. I checked social media during my lunch break. Belle was still posting. She had posted a story on Instagram from the loft. She was wearing a white silk robe, holding a mug of tea, standing on the balcony. I paid for. The caption read, "The enemy tries to break your spirit, but the light always wins. Standing tall in my sanctuary, unbothered survivor, my home." The comments were a chorus of support from our extended family. "Aunt Linda, so proud of you for keeping your head up, sweetie. Evil never wins. Cousin might keep grinding. Success is the best revenge." They truly believed it. They believed Belle was the victim of a jealous sister. They believed the loft was hers. My mother had spun the narrative so tightly that reality could not get in. I decided to pierce the bubble, just a little. I composed a single email. I addressed it to Gary and Diane. I did not copy Belle. "Mom, Dad, I'm not going to argue with you about the dinner or the insults, but 10 minutes ago I reported the signature on the home equity loan dated October 14th to the bank's fraud unit. I have provided them with my flight records proving I was in San Francisco that day. I'm not asking for an apology anymore. I am letting the paperwork speak. The bank will be contacting you shortly. Harper." I sent it. Then I went back to work. An hour later, Mr. Henderson called me into his office again. This time, the compliance director, Sarah, was there too. "Harper," Sarah said, smiling. "We finished the forensic review of the anonymous email and your conflict of interest disclosure, and I asked, and you are cleared," she said. "In fact, we found that the details in the anonymous email regarding the shell companies were technically inaccurate in a way that suggests the sender did not understand how LLCs work. It confirms your theory that it was a layperson trying to sound professional. We are closing the file," Mr. Henderson added. "And Harper, we are putting a block on any external emails coming from the IP address associated with your sister. She cannot contact anyone at this firm again." "Thank you," I said. I walked back to my desk, feeling invincible. My professional reputation was intact. The firewall was holding, but the firewall at home was crumbling. At 300, my office phone rang. It was the direct line, not my cell. Only a few people had this number. It was Gary Harper, he whispered. He sounded like he was hiding in a closet. He sounded terrified. I did not hang up. "The bank called," he said, his voice cracked. "They called the house line. They want to speak to both of us. They mentioned the FBI. Harper, they said something about wire fraud because the loan was processed across state lines." I said nothing. I let the silence stretch. "Harper, you have to stop this," he pleaded. "Your mother is not handling this well. She is saying you are bluffing. She is saying we just need to get you to sign a reaffirmation of debt. She thinks if you just sign a paper saying you forgot you were there, it all goes away. She wants me to commit perjury." "Dad," I said, "she wants me to lie to federal agents to cover up a felony you both committed." "We did it for the family," Gary cried out, losing his whisper. "We were drowning. Harper, the business slowed down. The house needed a roof. And Belle, she needed a start. We thought if we just took the loan, we could pay it back before anyone noticed. We never meant to hurt you. You stole my equity, Dad." I said, "You put my name on a six figure debt without asking me. That is not helping the family. That is using me as collateral. Just meet me," he begged. "Not your mother. Just me. I will drive to the city. I will meet you at a coffee shop. Anywhere, please. I am 62 years old. Harper, I cannot go to jail." I felt a pang of pity, sharp and deep. He was a weak man, a man who had let his wife steer the ship into the rocks. But he was still my father. "I cannot stop the bank, Dad," I said gently. "Once the fraud report is filed, it is out of my hands. It is an institutional process now. The only thing you can do, the only thing is to stop listening to Mom and get your own lawyer, a criminal defense lawyer." There was a sob on the other end of the line. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone. Diane had likely walked into the room and court him. She would be furious. She would be telling him that I was the villain, that I was bluffing, that she could charm her way out of a federal investigation. She was wrong. At 500, I began packing up my bag to leave. I felt drained. I wanted to go home, order takeout, and sleep for 12 hours, but my phone pinged with a notification from the Urban Key portal, the management app I use to oversee my properties. Alert viewing scheduled property. The Foundry Lofts Unit 4B request tenant, Bell Parker, notes, private sewing for prospective buyer. I froze prospective buyer. I clicked on the details. The appointment was set for tomorrow at 1:00 in the afternoon. The notes entered by the concierge who handled the building's bookings read: Tenant requests access for VIP guest. Tenant states unit is for sale by owner and needs guest parking. My jaw tightened. Belle was not just squatting. She was trying to sell the loft. She was going to bring someone into my property, pretend it was hers, and try to extract a deposit or an investment from them before the eviction notice hit. It was the ultimate con. She was selling the Golden Gate Bridge. She was selling the Eiffel Tower. She was selling my apartment. I called Eleanor immediately. She is trying to sell it, I said, my voice rising in disbelief. She listed it as for sale by owner. She can't sell it, Eleanor said, her voice calm but sharp. She doesn't have the deed. She can't transfer title. I know she can't close the deal, I said, but she can take a deposit. She can get a check for $10,000 or $20,000 from some unsuspecting investor and then vanish. She is desperate, Eleanor. The money from the parents is gone. The credit cards are frozen. She needs cash to run. We need to stop her. Eleanor said, I can send a cease and desist to the building management. No, I said. I thought about the dinner. I thought about the lies. I thought about the family trust she had invented to justify her theft. If we send a letter, she will just spin it. I said, she will tell the buyer it is a misunderstanding. She will lie. Then what do you want to do? Eleanor asked. I want to be there. I said, I looked at the schedule. Tomorrow 1:00. I'm going to take a half day tomorrow. I told Eleanor, I want you to come with me and I want you to bring the deed, the lease, and the eviction notice. You want to confront her in front of the buyer? Eleanor asked. No, I said. I want to save the buyer, and I want Belle to see that the world she built on my back is not just cracking. I want her to watch it shatter. I hung up the phone. I opened the folder on my computer. For one last time, I looked at the files, the voicemail, the text messages, the forged loan document, the tax deferment. I had enough to put them all in prison, but prison was abstract. Prison was a legal concept. Tomorrow, the consequence would be visceral. Tomorrow, Belle would try to sell a lie, and I would be standing in the doorway with the receipt. I closed my laptop. I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there in the riverfront district, my sister was likely fluffing pillows and practicing her pitch, telling herself she deserved this, telling herself that the world owed her a living. She was about to learn that the only thing the world owed her was the truth, and the interest rate on the truth was compounding daily. The elevator ride to the 4th floor of the Foundry lofts was the longest vertical journey of my life. It was not a slow elevator. It was a high-speed industrial lift designed to whisk residents to their pennies in seconds. A time distorts when you are about to demolish your own family's last illusion. I stood in the corner of a steel cabin. To my left was Eleanor holding a black leather briefcase that contained the legal reality of the situation. To my right was Mr. Gable, the senior property manager from Urban K. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He was used to dealing with leaky faucets and noise complaints, not a sting operation involving the owner's sister. We are just going to do a standard inspection, I reminded him, my voice calm. We are confirming occupancy and checking for unauthorized subaltern activity. That is all, Mr. Gable nodded, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. Right, standard inspection. I checked my phone one last time. The listing was still active on a private local real estate forum. Luxury riverfront loft off-market opportunity. Cash buyers only immediate possession. The photos were unmistakable. There was my sofa. There was the art I had helped Belle hang. And in the description, the seller listed only as B. Parker claimed to be the sole owner, looking for a quick close to fund an international expansion. She was asking for $450,000. The elevator chimed. The door slid open. We stepped into the hallway. It smelled of eucalyptus in desperation. The door to Unit 4B was propped open with a heavy ceramic door stop. Music was drifting out, some generic upbeat jazz playlist designed to make people feel wealthy. I could hear voices inside. I signaled for Eleanor and Mr. Gable to wait just out of sight. I needed to walk in first. I needed her to see me before the trap snapped shut. I walked through the doorway. The loft looked magnificent. The afternoon sun was streaming through the floor to ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Belle had staged the place aggressively. There were fresh flowers on the island. A bottle of champagne was chilling in a silver bucket. And there, standing in the center of the living room, was the cast of the play. Belle was wearing a white pants suit that looked tailored and expensive. She was gesturing expansively to the view. Gary and Diane were there, too. My father was sitting on the sofa, looking like a prop, holding a magazine he was not reading. My mother was standing by the kitchen, arranging a platter of artisanal cheeses. They were filling out the room, making it look lived in, loved and stable, and facing Belle was a man I recognized from his LinkedIn profile. Marcus Sterling, a local angel investor known for buying distressed properties and flipping them. He was wearing a sharp gray suit and looking at the ceiling beams with a critical eye. "And the assessments are fully paid, Mr. Sterling was asking. "Oh, absolutely," Belle said, her voice dripping with charm. "The building is in perfect financial health, and as the owner, I have handled all the capital improvement levies up front." I stepped fully into the room. "That is interesting," I said, my voice cutting through the jazz music, because the last time I checked, the owner was a limited liability company, not an individual. The room froze. Belle spun around. Her smile faltered, twitching at the corners before she plastered it back on with terrifying force. "Harper," she exclaimed, though her eyes were darting frantically to the door behind me. "What a surprise! I did not know you were coming to visit today." She turned to Mr. Sterling, letting out a breathless laugh. "This is my sister, Harper. She loves to drop by. She is very family-oriented." Diane stepped forward, wiping her hands on a napkin. Her face was a mask of warning. "Harper," she said through gritted teeth, "we are in the middle of a meeting. Perhaps you could come back later or go wait in the guest room." I did not move. I stayed planted on the hardwood floor I had paid for. "I do not think I will wait, Mom," I said. "I think Mr. Sterling might be interested in what I have to say." Mr. Sterling turned to me. He was a sharp man. He sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure immediately. He looked from Belle's frozen smile to my flat expression. "And who are you exactly, Mr. Sterling asked. "I am the reason this unit is not for sale," I said. Belle laughed, a high, brittle sound that bordered on hysteria. "She is such a joker," Belle said, reaching out to touch Mr. Sterling's arm. "She has a very dry sense of humor. Ignore her now." About the closing timeline, I stepped aside and motioned to the hallway. Eleanor and Mr. Gable walked in. Mr. Gable was wearing his Urban Key lanyard. Eleanor was holding the briefcase. Belle's face drained of all color. She recognized Mr. Gable. She had likely dodged his calls for the last 3 months. "What is this?" Belle whispered. Mr. Sterling looked at the new arrivals. He looked at Mr. Gable's lanyard. "I am confused," Mr. Sterling said, his voice cooling rapidly. "Ms. Parker, you told me you were the sole owner. You said you had the deed in hand." "I do," Belle insisted, though her voice was shaking. "It is with my lawyer. It is a complex estate thing." "No, it is not," I said. I nodded to Eleanor. She opened the briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. She handed them to Mr. Sterling. "This is the deed to Unit 4B. I said it is held by Parker Holdings, LLC. I am the sole member of that LLC, and this," I pointed to the second document, "is the lease agreement signed by Belle Parker. She is the tenant and she is currently 90 days in arrears on her rent." Mr. Sterling took the papers. He scanned them. He looked at the official county recorder stamp on the deed. He looked at the lease. He looked up at Belle. The professional courtesy vanished from his face, replaced by the anger of a businessman who realizes he is being hustled. "You are a tenant?" he asked. "You are trying to sell me a rental unit." "It is a misunderstanding," Diane shouted, rushing forward. She placed herself between Mr. Sterling and me, as if she could physically block the truth. "Herb handles the paperwork, but it is family property. Belle has equity. It is an informal arrangement." "There is nothing informal about a deed, Mrs. Parker." Mr. Sterling said. He handed the papers back to Alina. He looked at Belle with pure disgust. "This is fraud," he said. "Attempting to sell property you do not own is a felony. I should call the police right now." "No." Gary stood up from the sofa, his magazine falling to the floor. "Please, sir, no police. It was a mistake. She is young. She did not understand the technicalities. She understood enough to ask for $50,000 cash deposit." "Mr. Sterling snapped. He turned to me. "Thank you for the information, Ms. Parker," he said. "You saved me a lot of headache." He walked past Belle without looking at her. He walked out the door. We heard the elevator chime, and then he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the explosion happened. Diane whirled on me. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure rage. "You vicious, jealous little witch!" she screamed. She lunged at me, but Gary caught her by the waist. "You ruined it!" Diane shrieked, struggling against my father's grip. She had him. He was going to write a check today. "We could have paid you back. We could have fixed everything. Why do you have to destroy her?" I looked at her calmly. "You were going to take $50,000 from that man," I said, "and when he found out you could not transfer the title, he would have sued you. He would have sent Belle to prison. I did not destroy her. Mom, I stopped her from committing a crime that would have put her behind bars for 10 years. "I do not care," Belle screamed. She had collapsed onto the island, sweeping the flower vase onto the floor. It shattered, water and glass spraying everywhere. "You just cannot stand it," Belle sobbed. "You cannot stand that I have vision. You cannot stand that I am special. You have to humiliate me. You brought people here. You brought strangers to see me fall. You brought the stranger." "Belle," I said, "you invited a buyer to my house." "I just brought the truth." Gary was weeping now, holding Diane. "Harper, please just go. You made your point. Just go." "I am not going," I said. I turned to Mr. Gable. "Mr. Gable, please proceed with the inspection." Mr. Gable nodded nervously and took out his clipboard. He began walking around the room, taking photos of the white painted brick, the unauthorized light fixtures, the shattered vase. Belle watched him, her eyes wide with panic. She realized this was not just a family fight anymore. This was a documented legal process. She wiped her face. She looked at me and her expression shifted. The sorrow evaporated, replaced by a cold reptilian malice. "Okay," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Okay, Harper. You want to play hardball. Fine." She stood up and smoothed her pantsuit. "You think you are so perfect," she said. "You think you are the victim, but I know what you are. You are a creep. You are a stalker." She turned to Mr. Gable and Alina. "She listens to my phone calls," Belle announced, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She hacked into my voicemail. She recorded private conversations between me and my parents. She has been spying on us for months. That is how she knew about the buyer." Diane seized the narrative immediately. "Yes," Diane cried. "She is obsessed. She has illegal recordings. We are going to sue you, Harper. We are going to sue you for invasion of privacy. You will lose your job. You will lose your license." Belle smiled. "A nasty, triumphant thing. Go ahead, Harper." Belle taunted. "Tell your lawyer how you got the information. Tell them how you listened to us. Admit it. You are just a sad, lonely eavesdropper." I looked at them. They were so desperate to find a weapon, any weapon, to turn the tables. They thought the voicemail was my weakness. They thought my shame about hearing their insults would silence me. They were wrong. I did not spy. I said clearly, my voice did not waver. I took out my phone. I unlocked it. "You called me, Belle," I said on Tuesday, August 12th at 1:14 in the afternoon. "You pocket-dialed me. You left a 4-minute voicemail on my provider's server." I tapped the screen. I connected the phone to the Bluetooth speaker system Belle had installed, the one I had paid for. "I did not break into anything." I said, "You invited me in. You left the door open just like you left the door to this loft open today. And now we are all going to listen to what you have to say." "No!" Diane shouted. "Don't you dare!" I pressed play. The sound of the restaurant filled the loft, the clinking of silverware, the ambient chatter, and then my mother's voice amplified, clear and cruel. Harper would not know good taste if it bit her on the nose. She is a sweet girl, really, but she has absolutely nothing to show for herself. The color drained from Diane's face. She stopped struggling against Gary. The recording continued. She is basically a calculator with a bad haircut. Belle's voice rang out. It is just so dry. Mr. Gable stopped taking notes. He looked down at his shoes. Eleanor stood still, her face impassive. I let it play. I let it play through the insults. I let it play through the laughter. And then the room heard the line that had started the war. As long as she keeps paying the bills, let her think she is respected. She pays. So, she has a place in this family. I hit pause. The silence in the loft was absolute. The dust motes were still dancing, but the air felt vacuumed out. Diane looked at Gary. Gary looked at the floor. Belle was staring at the speaker, her mouth slightly open. I did not spy. I repeated softly. I was the audience you didn't know you had. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a vibration, short and sharp. I looked down. It was a text message from the criminal investigator at the bank. MS. Parker, we have completed the preliminary analysis of the loan documents. The handwriting expert has confirmed that the signatures were digitally replicated. We have also traced the notary stamp to a commission that expired 4 years ago. This is confirmed fraud. We are forwarding the package to the federal prosecutor's office this afternoon. You may be contacted for a witness statement. I looked up at my family. It is over. I said. Diane tried to speak, but her voice failed her. I just got the confirmation. I said, the bank knows about the loan. They know about the signatures, and they know I wasn't there. Gary let out a sound like a wounded animal. He sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. Oh, God, he moaned. Oh, God. Belle looked at me for the first time. There was no malice in her eyes. There was only the terrifying realization of a child who has played with matches and burned down the house. Harper, she whispered. What does that mean? It means, I said, pocketing my phone, that you do not have to worry about selling the loft anymore. You have bigger problems than a lease. I turned to Eleanor. Give them the eviction notice, I said, and then let's go. Eleanor placed the notice on the island, right next to the puddle of water from the broken vase. We walked to the door. I did not look back. I did not need to see them crumble. I had already heard the sound of the structure breaking, and it sounded exactly like the truth. The silence in the loft was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and thick with the dust of the shattered vase that lay on the floor. Mr. Sterling, the potential buyer, was gone. The elevator doors had closed, taking with them the last hope my family had of a quick cash exit. Now it was just us and the witnesses. I pointed to the living room arrangement, the beautiful cream-colored sectional sofa that I had paid for 3 months ago. Sit down, I said. It was not a request. It was an order. Diane looked at me with venom in her eyes, but she sat. Gary collapsed next to her, looking like a man whose skeleton had been removed. Belle sat on the edge of the ottoman, hugging herself, her white pants suit now stained with a splash of water from the flowers. Eleanor, my lawyer, stood by the kitchen island, opening her briefcase. Mr. Gable, the property manager, stood by the door, arms crossed, looking solemn. They were the jury. They were the proof that this was no longer a private family squabble. Diane cleared her throat. She tried to summon the imperious tone she had used on me for 3 decades. This is unnecessary theater. Harper, she said, though her voice wavered, we can discuss this like civilized people without strangers present. We tried that at dinner. I said, you turned it into a public shaming. So now we are going to do it my way. I walked to the center of the room. I placed my phone on the coffee table. I am going to play this one more time. I said, not to hurt you, but because for the last week you have told everyone, Aunt Linda, the cousins, the internet, that I am crazy, that I am paranoid, that I heard things that were not there. I tapped the screen. The audio filled the room again. The sounds of the restaurant. The laughter. She is basically a calculator with a bad haircut. Belle flinched. As long as she keeps paying the bills, let her think she is respected. Diane looked away, staring fixedly at a spot on the wall. She pays. So, she has a place in this family. I stopped the recording. That is the baseline. I said, that is the contract you wrote for me. I pay. I get a seat at the table. I stop paying. I become the enemy. Diane stood up abruptly. You are the one who betrayed us, she shouted, her voice shrill. You recorded a private moment. You set a trap. You have humiliated your sister in front of an investor. And now you are humiliating us in front of your employees. That is not what family does, Harper. Family protects each other. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had taught me to tie my shoes and also taught me that my worth was calculated in dollars. Family is not a place where you pay a cover charge to be treated with basic human decency, I said quietly. Family is not a subscription service. Mom, you do not get to renew my membership only when you need a check. I signaled to Eleanor. She handed me a folder. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a spreadsheet. I had formatted it simply. Date, merchant, amount. I walked over and dropped it on the coffee table in front of my father. This is the invoice, I said. Gary looked down. He picked up the paper with trembling hands. $40, 2,614. I read aloud. That is what I have paid in the last 18 months. That includes the rent for this loft, the insurance, the credit card bills, the emergency loans. Belle looked at the paper. She saw the number. For the first time, the abstraction of Harper handles it became a concrete, terrifying sum. I didn't know it was that much. Belle whispered. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, I said. You thought the money was magic. You thought it came from a trust that Mom invented. I turned to Diane. And that brings us to the final item. I said, the trust, the inheritance, the lie you told Belle to keep her dependent on you, and the lie you told yourself to justify stealing from me. I pulled out the last document, the bank investigation report regarding the home equity line of credit. Diane's eyes locked onto the bank logo. Her face went from red to a terrifying shade of gray. The bank called me today, I said. My voice was devoid of emotion. It was the voice of the auditor. They finished their preliminary review of the loan documents for the house. Specifically, the refinance you did 2 years ago. Gary made a sound like a whimper. They found that the signature listed as Harper Parker was a digital forgery. I continued, and they confirmed that on the day the document was notarized in Illinois, I was at a conference in San Francisco. I let the words hang in the air. That is wire fraud, Mom. I said, that is bank fraud. That is punishable by up to 30 years in federal prison. Belle looked from me to Diane. Her eyes were wide with horror. Mom, Belle asked, her voice high and panicked. Mom, what is she talking about? You said Harper signed it. You said she agreed to leverage her credit to help us. Diane did not answer. She was breathing shallow, fast breaths. You lied to her, too. I said to Diane, you told Belle I was the one holding the purse strings, that I was the one making her bed, when in reality you were the one stealing my identity to fund a lifestyle you could not afford. You used my name to dig a hole, and you threw Belle into it. Belle stood up. She looked at her mother. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The narrative she had clung to that she was the golden child and I was the miser dissolved. She realized she was not the princess. She was the accomplice. You told me she knew. Belle screamed at Diane. You told me Harper was fine with it. You said she was good with money so she could take the hit. I did it for you. Diane shouted back, finally snapping. She slammed her hands on her knees. I did it for this family. I wanted you to have a chance. I wanted us to have nice things. Is that a crime to want your children to shine? It is a crime when you commit a felony to do it, I said. Diane sneered at me. Oh, stop it. You are not going to send your own mother to jail. You do not have the stomach for it. You are too soft. You are just trying to scare us. I looked at Eleanor. Eleanor stepped forward. MS. Parker, Eleanor said, her voice cool and professional. The bank has already flagged the file. Once the fraud department confirms a synthetic identity was used, they are required by law to refer it to the federal prosecutor. Harper does not have to press charges. The bank does, and the bank always presses charges. Diane froze. The bluff was gone. The reality of the federal legal system had entered the room. Gary stood up slowly. He looked older than I had ever seen him. He looked at Diane. Then he looked at me. I knew, he whispered. Gary. Diane hissed. Shut up. No, Gary said, his voice gaining a sudden surprising strength. No, Diane. I am done." He looked at me and tears began to stream down his face. "I knew about the signature, Harper," he said. "I stood there and watched her copy it. I knew about the voicemail. I knew about the insults. I sat there and I let it happen." "Why?" I asked. "Why, Dad?" "Because I was afraid of the noise." He said. "I was afraid that if I stood up to her, the peace would break. I was afraid she would leave me. I was afraid Belle would hate me. So I let them eat you alive because it was quieter than stopping them." He took a breath, a ragged, painful sound. "I am sorry, Harper. I am so sorry. My silence was the rot that brought this house down." I looked at my father. This apology was real. It was too late to save our relationship, and it was certainly too late to save his credit score, but it was real. I nodded. "Thank you, Dad." I turned back to the table. I laid out the settlement agreement. "This is the deal," I said, "and this is the only time I will offer it." I pointed to the 3 signature lines. "1," I said, "Betrayal, you vacate this loft in 30 days. Mr. Gable will conduct a final walkthrough. Any damages come out of your pocket, not mine." Belle nodded, wiping her face. "Yes, okay." 2, I continued, "You all signed this document. It states that I have no financial obligation to any of you. It acknowledges that the debts incurred in my name were unauthorized. It is a firewall. If you ever try to open a card, a loan, or a gym membership in my name again, this document goes straight to the police and the bank." Diane asked, her voice trembling. "What about the investigation?" "I cannot stop the investigation," I said, "but if you sign this and if you agree to liquidate the house to pay back the bank before the indictment comes down, I will write a letter to the prosecutor. I will say that we have reached a civil restitution agreement. It might keep you out of prison. It might just get you probation, but you will lose the house." Diane stared at me. "Lose the house? But that is our home. That is my image. Your image was bought with stolen money." "Mom," I said, "it is gone." Diane looked at the paper. She looked at the luxury loft she was about to lose. She looked at her husband, who was no longer on her side. She looked at her favorite daughter, who was looking at her with horror. She realized finally that she had no cards left to play. She picked up the pen. She signed. Gary signed next. Then Belle. I took the document. I handed it to Elena. "We are done." I said. I turned to leave. "Harper," Diane said. She was still sitting on the sofa looking small and defeated. "I did it for the family. You have to believe that." I stopped at the door. I looked back at them one last time. The tableau of a family that had consumed itself. "You didn't do it for the family, Mom," I said. "You did it for power. You did it because you wanted to control how the world saw you. Family was just the label you pasted on the victims." I walked out the door. Mr. Gable followed me. Elena followed him. We stood in the hallway waiting for the elevator. "I will have the locks changed on the 31st day," Mr. Gable said, "and I will make sure the listing is taken down." "Thank you," I said. I rode the elevator down to the lobby. I walked out onto the street. The air in the riverfront district was cool and smelled of the river. It was the smell of my city. I took out my phone. I had one last thing to do. I opened the family group chat, the one with Aunt Linda, Cousin Mike, and all the people who had liked Belle's posts calling me toxic. I attached 2 photos. One was the bank fraud alert confirming the forged signatures. The second was the spreadsheet showing the $42,000 I had paid. I typed a single message. "I have stopped paying. The bank is handling the fraud investigation regarding the stolen identity. Anyone who wants to judge me is welcome to do so. But please judge me on the receipts, not the rumors. I wish you all well." I hit send. Then I left the group. I walked to my car. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew it was blowing up. I knew Aunt Linda was gasping. I knew the cousins were frantically texting each other. I did not look. I got into my car. It was a sedan with 112,000 M on it. It was gray. It was sensible. And it was fully paid for. I started the engine. I drove away from the loft, away from the image, away from the noise. They used to call me the stable one. They meant it as an insult. They meant I was boring. They meant I was static. But as I merged onto the highway, watching the skyline recede in my rear-view mirror, I realized they were right. I was stable. I was the ground. And when the earthquake came, I was the only thing left standing. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a wild ride, and I hope you enjoyed seeing Harper take her power back. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from New York, London, Sydney, or somewhere else? Drop your location in the comments below. Let's see how far Harper's story has traveled. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Azad Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need a little justice in their lives. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story. Thanks to all.